Brad Estes. Welcome. All right. Hey, everyone. Can you hear me? Thumbs up? Yep. Awesome. Glad to hear it. Glad to hear it. My name is Jay Blake. I'm the planning manager for Clatsop County, and I'm here to help facilitate our May. It is May. It's still May. Our May meeting of the Clatsop County Regional Housing Task Force. So let's start with introductions. I'm going to go to my left. Start there.
Hello, Steve Sokolowski from the city of Cannon Beach.
Jay Blake.
Jeff Adams.
Melanie Cochran, I'm sorry.
Steve Wright.
Barb Knopp.
Jeff Corey,
Leanne Thompson.
Alyssa Gertler. All right, let's go up to the top. John.
Representative Javity's office, John Lansing. Hi, everybody.
I recognize the voice now. All right. Garrett.
Hey, Garrett Phillips with Crest.
All right. Denise.
Denise Loffman, also with Crest.
All right. Robert.
Robert St. Clair, City Cannon Beach.
Jared.
Jared Pronowski, Columbia Memorial Hospital.
Brett.
Estes Department of Land Conservation and Development.
All right. And Aaron.
Hey there, just a community member here for the fun.
Well, you picked the right meeting, Aaron. Thanks for joining us. I'm glad you're here. All right. So today we have a packed agenda, most of which will include discussion and leadership from Alyssa Gertler, the county's housing manager. We did our welcome and introductions. We're going to talk today about the Lease to Local program. We're going to talk about the Regional Housing Production Data Review. We're going to talk about the Regional Housing Assistance Grant projects. And then we're going to talk about next steps. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Alyssa to lead us through the first discussion.
It does sound like a riveting agenda, doesn't it?
It does.
Data and grants, budgets. Luckily, this is exactly the right audience for this conversation,
Yeah.
so I appreciate you guys bearing with me, and I will welcome your feedback on all the topics. And I'm glad Cannon Beach, you guys are here because we have been talking about this Lease to Locals program, both at a countywide level and at a potential citywide level. We had Kai give us the full presentation at a previous meeting. I asked her to submit basically a proposal that we could use for funding, for decision-making, that actually has a dollar amount and a rent structure and a bunch of further details that I would like to show you guys, and then we can talk about next steps. I've had preliminary conversations with Leslie at CPCCO about potentially doing the 2-year pilot program funding so that none of you guys have to find any of this money in your budgets, or we have to find it in the county's budget. I think that will be one of our conversations around next steps, is both next steps around funding and also next steps around how we would agree to work together, or which city might want to take which step, etc. I've been thinking about, do we all pass a resolution that looks somewhat alike, depending on that? So that I would like your feedback on that. But let's start with just what the proposal is from Placemate and see what we think. So can you scroll to the next one? So this is what you'll see here is her proposed rent structure and incentive structure and rent cap. For those of you who are a little bit newer to the discussion, the idea of a Lease to Locals program is essentially paying a subsidy to property owners who have empty properties to rent to local workers rather than either out of like short-term rentals or keeping their properties vacant. And the idea is to basically make up the gap between what they might rent it for as a short term and do an incentive that would allow them to rent it as a long term. But that the rent would have to be capped in order for it to be affordable to local workers. And so the idea here is that there would be a cap, an income level of 150% area median income, which, you know, we like to remind you is your local government staff or your medical workers at CMH. And so that we hope would serve kind of the workforce housing that we're all trying to talk about here. And as you can see, the subsidy for, or the payment for each tenant would be $4,000 a renter, but that there would be a rent cap of $3,300 a month. And so her example property is, you have a 3-bedroom unit, you're renting to 3 qualified tenants on the long-term lease. So that gives you the 3 times 4,000, $12,000 incentive, but you are charging, say hypothetically, $3,000 a month. So the incentive bridges the gap between the 3,000 and the 4,000.
That's a good question.
Yes.
One of the things that people have said to me is I prefer short-term rentals because I've had such negative experiences with damages to the units committed by long-term renters. So is this, I would call it a bonus and then a stipend, separate from any kind of damages, or is damages not in this equation at all?
Well, right, the lease to locals program is the actual financial incentive program. It is not it does not engage in the landlord tenant relationship at all. And so that is between the landlord and the tenant. But what happens is the platform that Placemate uses allows you to pre-screen the tenants and pre-screen the property owners. What she told us in her presentations is often it's word of mouth in a small community that people say, oh, well, I know the owner of the gallery and I want to rent to them. And so it just becomes your normal landlord-tenant relationship. And so this is really just about putting in an incentive to make it more financially feasible for somebody to make a different decision about their property than they're normally making.
Very clear, thank you.
So what's the surety that we're actually adding rental units to the market and not units that are already long-term rentals?
That's a really interesting question, and I think we should talk to Kai about that, because they have this 2-tiered program. One is the new to the market, and they call the other one the rooted renters, where if you've already been a long-term landlord, you should have access to an incentive for your behavior already. And so I actually think we should ask Placemate, how do we distinguish that, and how do they distinguish that? Because
ultimately our goal is to put new rental units in our market, not incentivize current rental units that are only always going to be.
Right, we need a net change, exactly. Can you go to the next piece of this?
Yeah, I think that was a point she was really talking about. I can't remember if that was in Truckee or what, but that issue, but the people that were renting already did have some comments to their councils about, hey, we've been doing this and we're not getting any type of reward for doing the right thing previously. I can't remember if she said it was a time frame, like maybe it was a little bit shorter time that they might be able to receive the incentive. I can't remember offhand, but I remember that question came up and that local governments got hit from people who said, hey, we're doing the right thing already.
And so they created that part 2, which is you too are also eligible for these incentives if you're doing it. And so you get the same bonus.
You see it all right?
Yeah, I can see. Can you guys see this? So this is actually to your question, Jeff, how many new units do we think we can get on the market? And the target is 40 countywide, which is, they have these tiers of how, here's a small enough community, we can only do 10 a year. Here's a big enough community, we can do 20 a year. And their fees are based on their target. So we're in this mid-size 40 a year. They're at all of the different bedroom sizes. Leaning toward the larger, more family-oriented units, I think on purpose, the idea would then be 80 tenants end up getting a place to live. And you can see the incentive per unit as well. But I think that's the question, is how do we set the target of 40 and then track the target of 40 to understand which of those 40 units are actually coming online that were not online before. And so I think 40 to me seems like if we go countywide, a realistic target, right? Because part of this is where does it work? Where does it not work? Pilot program question, right? It might be that the uptake's all in Cannon Beach because you have more vacant rentals, but it might be that, but it might be that, we have nicer landlords in Seaside. I mean, we don't know. And so I think that's kind of the whole idea here, is to prove the concept and see what works and if it actually makes a difference. So to your point, Jeff, I think we would, if we ask for 40, we want to know how we're gonna measure those 40.
I feel like that would be a good maybe intake question too. Are you an existing?
Mm-hmm.
Are you new? Have you been doing this?
Right. And actually, I think with the eligibility, if you already are renting your unit, you don't necessarily qualify for the thing for a certain time period. And so that might be one way to say, like, you know, if you're already a long-term landlord, then you don't get this until you haven't been doing it for a year or something like that. I couldn't have come to the meeting, otherwise I would have had her here to answer all the questions, but I can go back and just ask her all these questions and get back to you.
I think one thing to add though is there's still some local control on how this is set up. This is a proposal and we can tinker with this as we move further down a little bit to answer some of those questions, I'm guessing.
Well, yeah, and I think that becomes the other question of sort of how would we programmatically and contractually agree to participate with each other in this and set the targets and manage it and oversee it and customize the requirements for the needs of our market. And so,
I mean, I apologize because I missed the meeting too. I wasn't able to make it to that one, but I could see this being very effective if in Cannon Beach and in Seaside specifically, if you took properties that were permitted as short-term rentals right now and told them they qualified for this, I could see pulling some of those out of that short-term rental pool into a long-term rental pool.
that's exactly
The
it.
properties, because we have fairly stringent requirements for short-term rentals, there's a lot of inventory in Seaside and in Cannon Beach that'll never be a short-term rental because they don't qualify, and it'll never be a long-term rental because they're still used by the family. But I could see certain short-term rentals that aren't used by the families that own them as often, pulling them into a program like this, which would add new rental owners to our inventory.
And you know, this is what she has told us all along. It's like not all houses are a good fit for this program, right? Like you look at Arch Cape, some of those are really nice houses, like they're never gonna be a renter house. But there are families, there are situations, there are properties, particularly in the short-term rental market. And I don't know if you guys are saying there's a downturn, I think, in Airbnb market significantly all over, not just here. Where people might say, yeah, for, you know, an extra $1,000 a month, you know, I could like make this work. I could have less problems, less regulations, and, you know, make some money. And so I think you're exactly right that there's a certain type of property and property owner the marketing should be directed toward. And that's one of the things I liked about Placemate is they were very targeted in who they marketed to and how they did that outreach. And I think they would want to hear this local feedback about here's who you need to go after. And I think we could, you know, again, there's a lot of word of mouth in this. Once this thing is up and running, we can start controlling who we tell.
I think she said exactly kind of what you said in terms of your comment and so I think she mentioned that. And so I think I'm getting old and forgetful. I already forgot what I was gonna say.
Well, can I just say, Arch Cape does have some older homes, not every home, because I've stayed in
Fair.
them, and the ants go marching in. You know?
Fair enough.
This include, if someone decided to do a 9-month versus a year, is the 40 inclusive of that?
Well, that's something we can talk about. She has recommended, you know, that they basically do seasonal and annual leases. And that some markets are good for seasonal leases and some are better for annual leases. And I think we could look at whether there's a seasonal cycle where that it wouldn't be a full 12-month lease and sort of prorated accordingly. And if that's something that seems like that would make sense in somebody's jurisdiction, I don't see why we couldn't build that into a program. They've already done that. And I don't know why you say 9 months. Is that like a school year or what are you thinking around 9 months?
Yeah, or just not renting over the
Not
summer.
during the summer season, right? So that would be like a seasonal, right, off season, on season kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, I think we should talk more about that. I think that's absolutely something that could be in a program.
I think the other thing she said, Jeff, where I was going was, they are gonna do all the marketing. So they do a lot of the outreach to properties that they believe will be interested in this program. So there's a lot of stuff that we don't have to do that they specifically do on our behalf as the contractor.
Right, and I believe she talked about like there's a postcard mailing to people who have, you know, addresses outside of the actual jurisdiction who might like, you know, their tax-paying addresses somewhere other than the house in New York City. And then all the short-term property, all the licensed STRs. So
she just felt comfortable from the standpoint of their overall business plan that they have a good feel as to what types of properties might respond. So from that perspective, we just let her go.
Yeah, I mean, I think, right, so the next slide actually has her marketing budget on it.
Plus, we have lots of citizens that constantly say, this house has never had anybody in it, or, you know.
Right.
And whether or not
Right.
that's valid.
It's a good way to start the discussion.
Yeah.
I'm working on a project where they're making stickers about second homes and they say, I'm empty inside. And, I feel like they could be part of our marketing plan.
I'm empty
Fundraiser.
Yeah, I know you guys say McKenna Beach.
Yeah.
Oh,
Is there, oh, good, Marcy's there.
the last one.
Yeah, go back to my last slide.
That budget, that was almost $1 million budget, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. For 2 years. Yeah, for those of you who like to look at budgets, here's the bottom line. We're talking $955,000. It's basically mostly the cost of the incentives. We all know they take an admin fee. They explained how they take that fee. And then the marketing budget as discussed. So do I hear $1 million? So I have 2 leads, one, the CPCCO that we've talked about, the other potential with the Ford Family Foundation to do a 2-year pilot program. And so who exactly would be the grantee, I think is still up in the air for discussion, but there's, they have this interesting intersection between affordable housing and this is sort of an economic development activity as well around workforce and supporting businesses. So I've had some preliminary conversations with them, but,
Any metrics associated with it?
the 40 units at each of the bedroom breakdown.
Yeah, but actual performance, not promises. Or projections or
What are you?
Well, I mean, so the money goes out, the marketing is done, they're prepared to do the administration. The incentives are available, but what if nothing happens? Is that we're just out the marketing and the admin or what?
Well, yeah, then the onus is on them and us to sign leases, to have properties leased up. And I think that becomes the performance target is how many leases are we signing? The other thing that we talked about is when is the ideal time to actually start this program relative to the rental market and the seasons, right? So we wouldn't want to start it right now because we're in the middle of the prime season and it wouldn't be a good time. But we think that sort of end of August, beginning of September, school year, end of season is the right time to start marketing this. And so we could sort of say, we expect X number of leases between September and December of this year, right? And then knowing that there might be a bit of a rolling process over the next time period. But I would imagine that, it wouldn't be 5 leases a month for 12 months, that there would be kind of an ebb and flow in terms of signing an annual or seasonal lease, depending on how you want to do it. Right, so if we were gonna do a bunch of 9-month leases, we would want to get them in September so that they would run out in time for somebody to change it over in June or May.
But my sense is people want to market in July rather than waiting till September because people want to plan ahead to be able to know where they're going.
Well, today is May 28th. And so we have some conversation and decisions if we want to be ready to roll it out in what I would think would be like a mid-August timeline. Seems about as realistic and ambitious as we can get it. If we get a thumbs up and agreement that this is what we want to do.
When does the Coast Guard change over? Cause
It's usually, they're looking for housing, usually like April, May, March, April, May. I think it's June typically.
But that's a great market to think about.
Mhm.
Yeah, that would be an important one.
There's accountability there.
Right, there would be like.
The other thing I'm wondering about is, could you actually pull in the entities? So would the hospital or the school or, I'm not sure, the Coast Guard, would any of them be the participant? And then they can bring their employees.
Well, we have Jared from CMH on the call and maybe we can ask Jared. Cause he's been very involved in this task force and I think CMH is always kind of on the lookout for housing. And so it's possible that they might say, hey, we're gonna connect with our HR department and every new hire that we have, we're gonna, try to find them a lease to locals program. Jared, I don't know if this is something that you want to speak to at all.
Yeah, we already do some of that already. I mean, we have local landlords that have reached out to our HR department. They like renting to hospital employees and So we have basically through word of mouth, we've had a list of landlords, apartment owners who we reach out to whenever we have a new employee coming into town and they're looking either for a place to land or for a place for the first year. But I could see us using a platform like this to help encourage those employees to find a place before they come here, for sure.
Yeah, thanks for your comments.
I wonder offhand in that fee, whether or not part of that fee for the administrative cost, if there would be any sort of measures in terms of, hey, you were successful in hitting the numbers we were after, so you get X. I don't know how that fee's determined. Is it determined just like, hey, this is the cost, this is what we're getting no matter what? Or is it,
Very
right?
The way they told us about it at the original presentation that we saw is that their fee is essentially scaled to the number of households that you're targeting.
Gotcha.
So that represents essentially a 40 household program, right? If we wanted to do 60 households, the fee would be higher. If we
Yes.
wanted to do 20 households, the fee would be lower.
Okay.
And so this is their 40 household price, and it includes, you know, the whole operation of
Yep.
the placemate platform where you can do all of the vetting of the tenants and the landlords. Although I don't know how, honestly, I don't know if word of mouth is gonna be more effective than an online platform, but both are good. Right, and then they do all of the basically administering of the incentives, tracking of the money being spent, right? None of us staff here would have to do that. None of you guys would have to oversee that. Which I think is a benefit, right? To sort of have a private enterprise rather than the government entity doing all of the exchanging of money between property owners and the program. I can only imagine how fun that would be, like in our procurement processes and things like that. And so to me, it's essentially like, you know, that's the cost of a staff person right there, is what we're getting. That's all I have in terms of what she shared with us.
And in terms of next steps.
Yeah.
I think you hear some general, oh, you know, that might work, you know, there's some positive response. Would this be something that we would want to present to each of the municipalities and the county to look for a resolution of support? That sort of thing? Is that a logical next step?
That's what I've been thinking, but I really wanted to ask each of the jurisdictions kind of what you think a way to make a shared decision is here. If it is that we draft a resolution that basically says, whereas we have a housing problem, therefore whereas we think this is a good solution, therefore we all agree to participate, whatever XYZ steps that might mean, for a 2-year pilot program funded by somebody other than us.
Do you think that's realistic? Cause that's where I was just gonna go, is who's paying what out of this fund?
We're in budget season right now.
Exactly.
And based on where it is, whether, not trying to slow things down, but if that's the case, everyone may have to plan accordingly. And whether or not it's rolled out, say 26, I'm not saying we wanna do that, but if where there's funding.
Yeah, I mean, in previous conversations we've had, right, none of us have extra money in our budgets right now, and none of us frankly have extra will in our communities to ask for more money for all of the reasons we all know. And so we rely on these other resources, right? CPCCO has made good housing investments that support local workers in our county. To me, right, we basically say, like, I didn't want to proceed with a grant application until we had enough local support, because I think, for me to submit a grant to CPCCO that has a support letter from the Clatsop County Board and Canton Beach Mayor and Seaside Mayor is a much more effective grant application than like, give us the money and then I'll see if they're okay with it. And honestly, I don't think that would be good faith in how to work with you all either.
Can you apply anytime?
Yeah, it's open right now,
Gotcha.
and I've already had the preliminary conversations with them. Same with Ford, like it's
So
open.
how quickly would you need something?
Well, I don't know. So that's a conversation I want to have. Like, do we want to pass resolutions before we submit a grant application? Do we want to submit a grant application with letters of support from each jurisdiction? And then if we get the money, how would you all like to proceed? I don't want to speak for any
I
of the
think a
other
resolution.
Resolution, yeah.
Pass a resolution.
That's gonna make our grant effective too. You say you've got
council support.
If I could have literally every city in the county plus the county, plus employers like CMH or whoever else it might be.
Is there a way that maybe a draft could be,
Template or something.
Yeah, I
prepared
have
or
a-
something?
I already have a draft resolution.
All right, I'll be quiet.
But I actually wanted to hear like what people need to have in it to make sure that, and Steve, maybe you and I can
Yeah.
send it around to all the staff folks and we can work on it and get everyone's feedback, but.
I think being able to say, we wanna participate, but if nobody in our city wants to do it, we don't wanna be penalized.
Well, I
You
think
know?
that's the thing we say is this is a proof of concept. We're purposely, we have a regional table where we solve problems regionally around housing together. We know that each city kind of has its own situation. And there would be no, right, you're not out any money, you're not, you're not shamed at the table here. We're not. I mean, maybe.
But I think the drawback is you're not participating in the program.
Well, right, but if everybody opts in, right, if we say everybody but Gearhart is in, no, I mean, that's your
Yeah.
loss, I think.
And that's no big deal, but that's how it'd be addressed.
It wouldn't be that Gearhart would be punished for not passing a resolution. I mean, but I think having Gearhart's support adds zest to the application.
And I'm not saying that, I'm
No,
saying
yeah.
Gerhart would sign the resolution, but that doesn't mean any of our short-term rentals wanna
Yeah,
take the bait.
they might not. Yeah,
They
right,
might
yeah,
not.
Yeah, yeah.
But this is the thing I think we want
But
to
we don't-
test. Does this work?
I think you'd be surprised, based on what Melissa said earlier, there is a huge downturn in STR revenue right now. And I know a few STR owners and operators that would probably jump at this. At least, if they were only making a year commitment, just because that revenue stream is so up and down, this is consistent.
Yeah.
And staff shortages for housekeeping
Mhm.
and maintenance. is a
Yeah.
big issue.
Hard just to have your STR being kept up to the
Right,
level it
that's
needs to be kept up. Exactly.
You guys probably see that news as much as we do.
Well,
They're
and this,
applying for only the finite number of housekeepers are
Right.
available.
Yeah.
exactly. Who
They're hiring
none
all
of
the
which
time.
live in your jurisdiction today, all can't find a place to live.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So do folks feel like a draft resolution would be a good next step? That I don't hear anybody saying, hey, red flag, don't make me do the like.
The only
planner thing.
municipality who's not at the table right now is Warrenton, and, oh, no, Warrenton's here, oh, sorry.
Not only is he at the table.
He's literally at the table, I'm thinking commissioner, sorry. But yeah, I think it's one of those things where, if you made that draft available, each of the staff people can bring it to the board, each of the boards.
Mhm. And do we think the timeline, if we all agreed on the language of a resolution, that it could happen in that July, August timeframe so that we could be prepared for a rollout?
Yeah.
And then I think the other thing is to couple that with full court press to CPCCO.
Do you wanna give a presentation to each council or board on what this is?
I'd be happy to. I don't know if Cannon Beach needs to hear it again. Yeah.
I think councilors will hear it.
And I think they do, she does a really good job of presenting.
Yeah, she really has a good model that I think gives confidence. So I would defer to whatever any of the jurisdictions want. We could definitely bring Kai from Placemate to your city council to walk through the whole where, for, and why before an action gets taken. And you guys at the county board haven't heard the whole thing either, so whatever.
Yeah, my comments are similar in that our board would just probably need a work session before it signs the resolutions.
Yeah, that makes sense. Makes sense.
Do you foresee an allocation of some kind, seats per city?
In terms of dividing up that 40 among the cities, I think what Kai said is, let's purposely not do that. Let's leave it open. Let's mark it across the board. The next agenda item, I'm gonna show you each city's percentage of short-term rentals and vacant homes, and you will see they vary widely between the cities. And so, right, for example, right, Warrenton probably has the least amount of either short-term rentals or vacant seasonal homes.
Yeah, and I think I understand your concern on that, but if this is fully funded from a grant compared to cities allocating specific dollars, I would have that concern of how we make sure that we're getting a fair share of the people But I think if it's a grant and we're doing it, you know, countywide, I think that's a different story.
I think the other thing is, if we're saying it's a 2-year program, we're gonna try it for 2 years, we're gonna learn something about it. Each city then might have its own off ramp. Hey, this is working really well in Cannon Beach and we wanna keep it going, and we're gonna figure out how to do it for another 2 years. Hey, we didn't really get much uptake in Gerhard or Warrenton, so we're not gonna continue in for the next 2 years. And so I think that might be the moment where we say, did it help you or did it not help you?
One other metric I would like to see captured here is regardless of where the rental is, but those qualified tenants, where they actually are employed. Cause I would venture to guess you're gonna see a lot of cross employed tenants that are living in Seaside, working in Canada, or working in Warrenton, or vice versa.
Yeah.
So while it may not have a direct impact on the number of rental units available in your community, it could have a direct impact on the number of qualified employees that are working in your community.
Right, I think it could still justifies that statement that we continue to make, that that's happening. And it's another documentation of that fact.
And as we've said, since the other Jeff Adams brought this group together originally, 2 years ago now, this has been a regional problem that needs regional solutions. Is the housing can't all be located in one spot, just because we don't have the availability for that. But it can be spread throughout the county, and the employees will commute a certain distance to get to your community to work.
Well, and to the other point that we've heard, like from the hospital and such, is have to recruit them here in the first place. They have to be able to even have a place to land, which is also, I think, a key employer issue, right? So I think that it would be a metric that we could, you know, in order to apply for the program and be an eligible renter, you have to prove that you're employed somewhere in Clatsop County and show where it is, and we could easily keep track of that data, I think, when can put that in a resolution too, like, here's the things we wanna see, in order to agree to this program. So I'll add that stuff in and work with you guys on that. So I'm getting the green light to keep going. Draft the resolution with my colleagues around here. We'll all aim for the time frame of July and August to get this thing done. I will work on a grant application again with some help from my colleagues. And then we will probably need support letters from you electeds to do that, and employers as well.
Do we, would it be something too that, well, I suppose we're making the grant, so we're not, I was gonna say the task force, but we're doing the grant, okay. Is that the county or the task force? That's, the quote unquote.
The applicant.
Yeah.
I think the task force isn't a.
Right.
It's not an entity. It's not an entity,
Right.
So it'll have to be the county on behalf of the task force, which.
Yeah, and then could we write a letter from, I guess, the task force as part of that?
Sure, I mean.
I suppose the resolution does it, but.
Yeah, right, I think whatever way we wanna determine that we wanna convey, I think there's a difference between conveying the collective support and conveying individual jurisdictional support.
Yeah.
Right, and both things are important, and each tell a little bit of the whole story, which is, we all know we have our problem on our own, and we all know we have to work together to solve it, which is what Jeff said. Jeff 1 and Jeff 2.
Tell me again the time frame for if you get that resolution done, getting that signed and back, or.
The idea would be for you guys to have it probably on a late July, early August agenda. Do any of you guys take recess in August?
We usually don't need a second meeting.
Okay. Yeah. Where I come from, like, no council met in August. Everyone just took August off.
Yeah, well, that's because you came here.
Yeah, that.
Yeah, all those people came to Coast in August.
I'm not gonna contradict you, Commissioner.
We having another meeting and
We have a July meeting, a June meeting. We do have a June meeting.
wonder if we could try to shoot for maybe a draft to show everyone at the June meeting.
Yeah, in a month from now, or even sooner.
That way everyone can eyeball it before it goes to council, their own.
Well, free is a very good price, and it's proof of concept that somebody else is paying for. It's like, what's the downside of this?
Yeah.
I mean, somebody will, I'm pretty sure
Someone might find.
Yeah.
and tell us about it, but nevertheless,
Yeah, the downside is it might not work.
oh.
Well,
We have
I'm
to
thinking
try.
I'm thinking of ongoing funding mechanisms too. If this works and is successful, then it becomes a situation, okay, how do we fund this for past the 2-year boundary?
Which
Is
is,
there other Canada Beach reference test.
But I will tell you,
Tax on vacant homes might be a good one.
well, I do think too that the people are at the table over the course of this 2-year time frame are gonna have to keep that as part of the discussion. It's so that if it does come down to, we need someone to write some additional grants, or if it comes down to, we have to seek out state funding, or we have to seek out local funding, or whatever it happens to be, the people around this table are the ones who I think are gonna have to continue that discussion.
So Oregon Housing and Community Services, if there were this localized inside Clatsop County, there's a whole range of the tourism counties who would be behind it to go to the next step. And then we get into Oregon Housing and Community Services. So there's a plausible pathway forward, even if there's no assured route.
You know, in other communities, people use their tourism lodging tax to pay for this, right? So, there are.
That's what I've been thinking here. That's, I mean,
It'd be great.
that's why we need the housing.
It's against the law, so.
Currently, exactly.
At this moment.
Discussions are continuing, but it's a good way to move things forward and help with a bad problem.
Well, it's great. Our representatives here listening.
Yes, and I know that places like Hood River County are also looking at this. And so there might be a larger conversation that isn't just our county having a conversation about this, which might help a statewide discussion.
Yeah.
Well, I'm excited to keep moving forward on this and appreciate your thoughtful support, and it'd be really interesting to see if we can get this thing off the ground with somebody else's money. Right, this is all great as long as somebody's paying for it, right? Otherwise, we're having a totally different conversation.
That's right. Well, I'm gonna end number 2 on our agenda, and I'm gonna quickly move us on to number 3, which is the regional housing production data review. And for that, I'd like to introduce Alyssa Gertler.
Hi, everyone. This is hard to see.
Yes.
And we can blow it up and we can email it out.
Okay. You got it.
So I've been telling you guys for a few months now that I've taken the data that we have on the Clatsop County. Does that help at all to anybody? Or is it just okay. So we have the Clatsop County Housing Dashboard, and one of the things we do is we track certificate of occupancy data submitted to us by the cities on a GIS database, so we can see exactly where new housing is being produced in the county over time. And we decided that we would take what is essentially a big map and turn it into some more useful charts. So, and actually Marcy McAnally from HerbsWorks is on the call. She's Cannon Beach's consultant on a number of things, but she and her team work very closely with me to actually take data and make it into meaningful charts. If you guys had me do this, this would not look like this. So, and it took months to A, make sure the data was right, and B, figure out how to most accurately visualize it in a meaningful way. So while this might look like a boring chart, it represents a lot of work on the part of HerbsWorks and their ability to do data visualization in a very cool way. So I just wanted to say thanks to Cannon Beach for helping pay Marcy to do this. But again, this is a proof of concept that I actually think can be applied in communities throughout the state. Yeah,
This is a big deal. It's very cool.
Yeah, I mean, and again, other counties are already expressing interest in getting similar data, and I will say it's only as good as the data, right? And so this reflects what we have reported. So I already know from cities like, well, this doesn't exactly match our permit data. Well, that's because you didn't report all your permit data to us exactly right, and that's fine. I don't think for the purposes of this, it's not about 100% accuracy. At this point, it's more about understanding what the data is telling us about the issues that we're dealing with.
There's a story here that needs to be told.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there are 2 charts that look like this. This is the first one, and it is, so it's, the time period is 2018 to 23. I don't have the most recent data yet updated. And this one is, as it says, broken out by each jurisdiction across the years, and then the colors on the charts indicate the different types of housing. So the green is single family, the light blue is 1 to 2 family, the mustardy yellow or whatever it's coming across here is a manufactured home, and the dark blue is multifamily. And so you can see that really, at a quick glance, we've built mostly single-family housing in the county in every jurisdiction. Some are doing more in the smaller 1 to 2 family, and then every so often you'll see, you know, a big blue bar, which basically like indicates that somebody built an apartment building. So you think about something like the Merwin in Astoria, where 42 units came online in 1 year. And so that's what a lot of those dark blues are. And just going across the county, just going across the top, so we included the unincorporated areas, so that includes everything from, you know, Arch Cape, Miles Crossing, Jeffers Gardens, Elsie, Jewel, your whole district, basically. And the county unincorporated has a larger population than any of the other jurisdictions. So there's about 14,000 people living in the unincorporated area. There's about 10,000 people living in Astoria. Across the top, we put the number of people living in each jurisdiction as well as the number of total units in each jurisdiction. So while it looks like Clatsop County has built more in the unincorporated area than any of the cities have built, which is, as Jay and I keep saying, why are we building more outside of the UGB than inside of the UGB? But there's a lot of reasons why for what's happening in these different unincorporated areas.
Yeah.
People with money want to build houses.
And you know, Brett's on the call. We can ask DLCD what they think about that,
Sure.
or Land Conservation
It's
Commission.
just Brexit.
But then once you take the county out on the left, it goes Cannon Beach, Gearhart, Seaside, Warrenton, Astoria. And everyone is more or less in a similar ballpark. Actually, you know, nobody in this room will be surprised that Seaside is ahead of everyone else because they've been working really diligently on that for a long time. I think what might be a surprise is how much production has happened in Gearhart. And then you look at Cannon Beach and Astoria, they're a little bit less productive than the others, but there are good reasons that we all know the story behind
that all the time.
But I will say one interesting thing about Cannon Beach is if you notice over the years, the colors change from single family to smaller units. So that looks like some of the changes around ADUs or, you know, smaller building types. So that's an interesting trend to observe. And again, you'll notice that in places like the county, that we're building much more of the manufactured home product than in any of the cities, which also makes sense. And so let's go to the next one because it's the same thing, but just sliced slightly different. Look, it looks the same, but not. This one is year over year. So instead of doing it by each jurisdiction to see what you built by year, this is basically saying how much happened in 2018, 19, 20, 21. And again, I don't think people will be super surprised to see that we had some spikes in the pandemic era in 2020, 21, and then maybe a little bit of a drop off as you get toward 22 and 23. This is a little bit, it tells a bit of a different story because it is then each jurisdiction is lined up, same order: Clatsop County, Cannon Beach, Gearhart, Seaside, Warrenton, Astoria.
It's very cool.
And so again, this is not any official thing that we have to submit, any report. It's just, again, data that's trying to help us understand the trends that we're each dealing with.
A couple of things I want to add here, specifically from the Clatsop County unincorporated area perspective. Every time we build a house in unincorporated Clatsop County, we actually use more land because they're on 1 acre, 2 acre, 5 acre, and 10 acre lots. And so that to me is concerning because we're not going to be able to continue to produce at that rate given land restrictions that we have and development restrictions. So this is not something you can expect Clatsop County to continue for a long period of time because they're going to run out of R1 land, R2 land, R3 land, you know, all those rural agriculture, residential agricultural developments. So this, I don't know if this has gone back even further, but you can see that this is a big jump in terms of the number of people on septic systems, the number of people either on a rural water system or on wells. So it again, it's a different type of development than you would see in an urban area like Cannon Beach, Seaside, Gearhart, Warrenton, Astoria. In each of those cities have constraints that are causing problems for them to build something bigger or more of them. So
that's really good point. And we've all seen our most recent buildable land inventory, so I think we all know that we're not sitting on a wealth of additional buildable land, and the ones that have been buildable are somewhere in a planning and development process, so we're using up our land. The other interesting thing about this is if you look across the top, it shows how many units a year, so I can't actually see it all.
2018 is 165 total units. 2019 is 255. 2020 is 143. 2021 is 156. 2022 is 227. And 2023 is 238.
And just for perspective, the new Oregon Housing Needs Analysis targets for our area are about 250 units a year for the next 20 years. So we are in the ballpark, but we are under the line. And I think to Jay's point, like as land gets more constrained, how do we start meeting these targets over the next 20 years? And knowing that only one jurisdiction has be held accountable and the rest of you can do whatever you want.
Well, yeah, that's interesting when you take a look at Astoria's numbers from the standpoint of how you guys will be impacted as far as what you're required and what you're producing.
Yeah. I think it sets the stage for their
it's just nuts.
housing production strategy. It's the conversation.
Mhm.
Yeah, we're not trying.
The blue line is the, in the county, and it looks like it may be duplexes or something that says 1 to 2 family.
Right.
Do you have any idea, like, where are those being built? I mean, is there a cluster, 2 or 5?
It's an interesting thing because and we can talk about this more, but like what is considered a 1 to 2 family, right? Sometimes that's somebody turning their garage into an ADU and it's on a single family lot, or they're building a second unit on an existing large lot.
Okay.
Versus just building a single family house. Some of them are actually more of the smaller footprint houses. So you're building 2 smaller footprint houses where you built 1 previous. And so to me, it starts reflecting like the state legislation that, you know, got rid of the single family zoning where people are building smaller footprints, which is why you see it later mostly in the later years. And that's also just a function of how we issue our permits and what we call, you know, a 1 to 2 and what's a multifamily, et cetera. And Works and I went around and around and around trying to make sure that we know what we were actually talking about in those 1 to 2 units. I don't know if let's go to the next one. And then if Marcy wants to add anything, I want to let her add. Okay, this is one that I think we've all wondered what it looks like. We took, we actually used the 3J report on this with the census data that looks at homes that are considered vacant for seasonal use in the US Census. And vacant for seasonal use is different than vacant for other reasons, which could be it's on the market, it's under remodeling, owners in the military. There's a whole category in the census of vacant because it's on the market, or vacant because somebody only uses it at Thanksgiving. These are just the vacant for seasonal use houses reported by each jurisdiction. And then the red ones are the number of known short-term rentals in each jurisdiction. And so this just gives you a sense of proportion of one, the relationship between a vacant home issue and a short-term rental issue, which is we all really have more vacant homes than we have short-term rentals as the housing supply issue, no matter what, including the unincorporated county. And that in some cases, a very significant portion of the jurisdiction's housing stock is in vacation use and is not full-time use. And again, this is not about pointing fingers at any jurisdiction, but look at Cannon Beach, right? It's 2/3 of your housing stock is vacant for seasonal use. Gearhart is about half. We in the unincorporated county, we're about 25% of our units in the unincorporated county. And again, those are, you know, clustered in certain areas where they're allowed and not where they're not allowed.
Yeah.
But again, I think every jurisdiction's having a conversation, especially things like how do we regulate short-term rentals? What do we do about vacant homes? How does that actually move the needle to Jeff's point? Like, how do we know we're actually getting housing for local people, right? And maybe, you know, regulating short-term rentals is a small part of the problem relative to addressing the vacant for seasonal use.
I think everybody has, you know, fairly restrictive short-term rental regulations now, except for the unincorporated county, right? You guys have certain zones that are allowed?
We just established the 10% cap for each of the districts west of Highway 101 and all of Arch Cape. And I will tell you that process caused more phone calls for people to get the last minute short-term rentals in. I can talk about my neighborhood. 3 of my neighbors went and got short-term rental permits. They don't have any intention of really using them, but they might, but they got it. Now they're in on that cap. So the cap, I think, will cause some changes there too. Because there are certain parts of our county where it's at 30 and 40%. And other parts of our county are at 2% of the housing stock in short-term rentals. So it's an interesting thing. I was surprised at the vacant seasonal use percentages here. This really, I knew it was larger, but I didn't think it was as much as this.
Yeah, and I would say that was a conversation we've been having, Mayor, for probably about 2 years now, in terms of a lot of people thinking it was just the short term.
Right.
And to have like the documentation and actual physical representations to show people that, hey, this truly is the issue.
Exactly.
And I don't know, when you talk about cap, any sort of initial thoughts one way or the other about the cap? The good, the bad, and I know it's new, but any just general comments or thoughts on that?
From a staff standpoint, the cap that was established allowed a few extra units in some areas, but there were clearly 2 or 3 of the neighborhoods that were already well beyond that cap limit. So that anytime we lose one there, it can't be replaced. So ultimately, it will start to go down. I think that it created a sense of stability in terms of the number of them that we see. If you look at this, the little red line on unincorporated Clatsop County, that's pretty minor in terms of all of unincorporated Clatsop County. And yet we've spent a lot of time talking about it.
So here's the thing, you say stability, it meant my neighbors sold their house so that they could reap the financial whatever.
Yeah.
And get out, and it was somebody else's problem.
Yeah.
Who could get in, they could sell the house under the auspices of you can rent it if you want to.
Mm-hmm.
You have the option, so they got out and done. I saw a lot of turnover in the neighborhood.
There was some of that, yeah, I know.
Yeah, really interesting. You only got 119 overall. So is it as truly a big of a problem as
No.
everyone
People wanted
thinks?
to pretend.
Well, and it seems like, to your point, that's often the case in jurisdictions that people want to point the finger at those short-term rental owners.
Right.
Meanwhile, the big problem is that most of the houses that are not available are vacant and not for short-term rental and not contributing to ELD and all that stuff.
I think it's also too early to tell what the overall impact's going to be. It's only been a couple of months, and people are now starting to renew permits, and so we'll see what happens.
I inserted this into a slide deck to present to our council. And because it's such a great slide, we actually withdrew it at the last moment because of the conversations we were anticipating that it would start.
But look what it did to us
To
here.
trigger,
It just.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Sideways.
yeah, it's powerful stuff here, yeah, and I can't wait until we can have a conversation.
Well, it's reality therapy. I mean, what we're dealing with is an economic issue because housing is related to the tax base. We don't have an adequate tax base to provide the services. We don't have housing for people to live in to provide that adequate tax base. So how do we get enough money to have the services that every community wants to have when we're looking at housing situations like this?
An interesting metric to look at for those of you that have water and sewer systems. Take a look at your water usage rates on your short-term rentals.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
I was gonna mention along that line, for Seaside, short-term rentals are a significant piece of revenue.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And part of the reason that we don't have as many fiscal issues as a lot of places is, we have a huge amount of income coming from both the short-term rentals and the hotel.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think that's actually an important piece to say is.
And part of the reason why, we have by far the cheapest water and sewer rates in the county because of these short-term rentals. They don't use the water, but they get billed the normal bill everybody else gets billed.
The short-term rentals use way more water than a standard household.
Yeah.
Because they're on vacation, who cares?
Yeah.
There's 8 people taking a shower and, you know.
Then it's in the vacant home.
Laundry.
The vacant.
Yeah,
units are the
yeah,
ones that are-
yeah.
This would certainly help, tell the public the right story, that they continue to focus on short-term rentals as the problem, and that's not.
Several of the larger short-term
Whether you're
rentals,
going to try to tax, vacant homes, that's a whole nother thing. There's places that have tried it and it's failed.
Yeah.
An expensive failure, because it
Yeah.
seems logical, but
Well, and what we've been talking about in our discussions is maybe it's not called a tax, maybe it's called a contribution to your community. And actually, at the meeting in June, I'm inviting a guy named Gil Kelly, who was the former planning director in Berkeley, San Francisco, Portland, and Vancouver, BC, to come talk to us about experiences with vacant home taxes and how to avoid the pitfalls.
Because Vancouver, BC has.
Yeah, they're one of the more successful ones. You know, so San Francisco got tied up in court and Berkeley got tied up in court, but I think Berkeley is happening now. And so, again, let's learn from somebody who's seen it in a bunch of different places. And he's now an Oregon-based guy. I know him from Portland, and so he can kind of speak to our specific situation rather than what they do in Canada. But frankly, the vacant homes tax keeps coming up in every conversation I'm having with folks, especially when I show this slide. And so, but we know that it brings community angst no matter what. And so that's
Yes, it does.
but so that I feel like we can continue to have the conversation, because maybe in 2 years after we do lease to locals and it turns out that it's been successful, we then have a basis to say to the community, hey, for the next 2 years, we need to fund it with vacant home tax.
Contribution.
Yeah, contribution. See, I feel like that's what we need to do. It's just a little rebrand right there. This is the last slide. I just also want to point.
Does Marcy want to add anything?
Yeah, let's see if Marcy or anyone else.
That's correct. Break time.
Marcy, do you have anything to add?
I'll only add that this was the best we could do with the data that we had. And so getting the data correct, something that I think all the jurisdictions in the county can work together on in the future. We were working with, as Alyssa knows, this gigantic spreadsheet that showed each property by year, by jurisdiction, by permit subtype and structure type. And these 2 different categorizations caused, some issue, because different municipalities would apply a different permit subtype than to the structure type. So we had to interpolate between some of these, and you probably can imagine that most of the interpolation took place in the permit subtype of 1 and 2 family. Was it a ADU because some cities categorized it that way, or was it a duplex, etc.? So, but I think it's close. I mean, close enough, really, for us to understand the trends and to tell the story.
How did you, come up with what, you called the, seasonally vacant? How do you determine that?
So
that's a good question for Alyssa to answer. I think that's a much more well-known number, much more, it was easy. I think it's more of a singular number. Is that correct?
Yeah, in each of the reports that you have from 3J, in the housing needs assessment, what they did is look at the census data. And the way the census data looks at this is vacant homes, and then the category under vacant homes is, are they vacant for seasonal use, or are they vacant for some other reason? And so it's US Census data. This is, I believe, the 2023 US American Community Survey US Census data. So it's not the most recent year, but it's the most recent year we have the data for. So that's where it comes from. And so right to that point, and then the STR data comes from permits and licenses. So to Marcy's point, it's only as good as the reporting, and you never know if the census, completely gets it right, if it's again, I feel like we're in an order of magnitude here. It's a ballpark. We could probably dial it in more with, if we really wanted to get deeper in the data, and we could.
Does the Department of Land, I'd like Brett to tell us if DLCD has any sense of the taxonomy they're applying as they're looking at housing all over Oregon. Because it would seem that data issue would be true on the larger scale as well. Not to put you on the spot, but I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, here's the deal. I mean, I think it's also how good is the data coming out of the permit offices from the various cities as well. One of the things uh, we've seen in uh some of the data that's come in from the different jurisdictions is that there's been some underreporting because maybe the jurisdiction didn't get their information into us or into the state. And it's not to DLCD who actually collects that. It's there's the Population Research Center at Portland State and other entities and also Oregon OCS, Oregon Housing and Community Services, is collecting data for the dashboard. And so sometimes the data is only as good as whatever is put in by the jurisdiction, and that's where there needs to be also whenever there's reports that come out, the jurisdiction's looking at that to make sure that they're concurring with what is being reported back. One thing I would go, Alyssa, if you'd go to the prior slide.
This one?
Yeah, I mean, I even look here. I think I'm thinking back, I'm not wearing my DLCD hat right now, but my prior Astoria City Manager hat, where I think the Merwin Hotel is not shown on this data at all. And for Astoria.
And Astoria staff has already identified that issue, and we've talked about some of the data reporting, and so it is captured in some places, but not on this slide. You're exactly right, and Marcy and I know that, and City of Astoria knows it too.
Okay, good. Yeah, I saw that, and so I was like, wow, there would be a big uptick in around 2021.
40 units came online in 2021 in a multifamily in the Merwin. Is that right?
Right. Yeah, that's correct. So, but Commissioner, that really kind of the thing is the data that DLCD has DLCD is not a data collecting entity under. It's really the folks that are doing that. It's between Population Research Center dealing with population projections, and then also Oregon Housing and Community Services. But I can tell you within some of my areas within the North Coast, when there's some the OHCS reports that came out earlier this year, there was some data that looked maybe like it may have been incorrect, and so I'd reached out to those jurisdictions and said, hey, take a look at this because there may be an issue here. And I know those jurisdictions were looking into that to be able to help get that data clarified back to Oregon Housing and Community Services.
If you ever wonder if reporting matters, it does.
It does. Yeah.
Well, what I'm trying to put together is there'll be an impact on the data for what the governor says and what the legislature says and where the money is and where the rules, it all plays together. So just looking at how it fits together, because whatever comes down in the form of rules will impact supposedly what we produce.
Well, and that's my goal with just producing this information, is making it easier to tell the story. To me, it goes well with our buildable land inventory and our housing needs assessment, which is we don't have land, we have fragile natural resources, we have a vacation economy where we actually depend on some of these houses being available for short-term rental. There's a number of things that tell the story here around what kind of rules and laws and expectations need to be set around housing here, but also how we might target our solutions to the problems, right? How to have a better actual follow-up on what we think we can do here.
Let's see, and also infrastructure, where our dollars need to go in transportation and sewer and water and all those things. So that's
so you can't leave, without putting that. We want a light pole or something with that.
All right.
Okay, any other questions on this? I'm happy to email this out to all of you guys so that you can have it and feel free to use it however you see fit.
Well, are you gonna do media people so that there's some publicity about this as well?
Well, how do you guys feel about that? I don't want it to be like, look at Astoria, they haven't built any housing.
Get the data right and then send it out.
I think you have to be careful.
Yeah.
I told you a little bit about our experience, and it's gonna take us somewhere we're not prepared to go yet.
Yeah,
But at some point,
yeah.
yeah, because people, Jane knows, it. I mean, people make up stuff. And if they're attorneys, they make up. That kind of goes with the people lie, cheat, and steal, the social worker knows, but all I'm saying is if we can have a community conversation that's more accurately related to actual data
Yeah.
and trends.
Yeah.
What a concept, huh?
Yeah.
The other thing is, it's not a very good newsworthy hook to say, county releases data. Sorry, that's like such a boring.
County makes a chart.
Yeah,
There we go. That's a good one.
And so, it's,
Above the fold on the Daily Age.
I mean, these days, local journalism, right, we'll take what we can get. I send out a quarterly county housing newsletter. This is gonna be in the county housing newsletter, if anybody wants to pick it up.
All I'm saying is that there's a new editor coming to the Astorian on June 9th. And it seems like a good opportunity if you put this in the hands of some people who have already been invited to talk to that person. So that we can have a more informed reportage. It'll help with public awareness and education.
I'm sorry, I was gonna say up in line. Jared, do you wanna jump in?
I just had a quick clarifying question where it has units listed as multifamily. Where, when the comment came up about the apartments not being shown, I see multiple places where it says multifamily and there's numbers like 1 and 3. Does that mean 3 multiple family units? So like one apartment building with 20 units could be considered a 1?
Marcy, do you want to answer that?
The number of units on that spreadsheet is included in the column. We were wondering about that too. Like, how could there be just one multi-dwelling? But that's
not actual doors. It's
not the building, it's the unit.
Yeah, I think the multifamily reporting needs some updating. We know that, this is what the data shows now, but we all know that the ground shows something else.
Good.
That was one of the problematic housing categories, that we struggled with in Cannon Beach too. Just the inventory is not totally up to date.
Okay.
I really would recommend that this be updated, but I don't know how long that will take for all the municipalities kind of correct their data. But yeah.
It's part of those building codes defines multifamily different than planning codes, so.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I agree with Marcy that the better the data, the better the story, right? The more accurate this is, the better it helps us actually build trust around what we're saying. And
So you put draft on this?
Yeah, I can put draft on it and we can do it that way. I mean, it took us like 3 months to do this. And so, to work with each city to make sure that everybody is submitting what they want and it's reflecting, like, I feel like it would take at least another 3 months to do that. But, again, in terms of timely decision-making, right? Like we finished our buildable land inventory, we finished this, I think, to me, it's informing what do we want to do next, if anything. Or, what might a jurisdiction want to do next? So, again, all my colleagues who work in the cities, I know you have other things to do besides update my charts, but we can talk about, the timeline and the next steps on this in terms of how we want to do that.
Transition, excellent job. You talked about next steps, and we're gonna go to item number 4, which is potential housing planning assistant grant projects discussion. As we wrap up much of the work that we've been focused on for the last year in the work of the 5 cities and the unincorporated county, we now have an opportunity to continue that discussion. This past week, I was able to participate in an informational webinar that DLCD and other organizations within the state. I think, Brett, you were on that call, weren't you? Were you on that one as well?
Yes, I was.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was
so,
the Housing Accountability and Production Office, as well as the Housing Division, which was hosting that webinar.
correct, yeah. And so they talked about the upcoming grant cycle, and they talked about items where focus is going to be placed in terms of their funding priorities. They talked about Goal 10 housing, which is your housing capacity analysis, housing production strategies, implementation plans. Really, Astoria is the one that's a little bit behind the eight ball in that they are the one that is absolutely required to do this. But they also talked about planning exercises that look at Goal 14 and urbanization, changes in urban growth boundaries, perhaps land exchanges, boundary amendments, urban reserve planning, which is something we talked about 2 years ago here, and talking about creating development readiness plans for housing. They also talked about development code, reducing barriers to housing, but we've really focused a lot on that already in our county. A lot of the municipalities have already gone through or are in the process of going through code amendments. But those are the ideas that they talked about things that they would like to see done and things that they would like to help fund. And the application process for this upcoming year starts June 2nd. And last year, Garrett and Alyssa put together the grant application very quickly and was very successful in obtaining the services of 3J in getting the work done for each of our municipalities in the unincorporated county. The question lies, and this is again gonna fall to some extent on Alyssa, is there a next step that's logical either at the county level or at a municipal level that we can help with? And so I want to throw that out, Alyssa, if you want to add anything to that. And then I'm going to ask Brett to talk a little bit about DLCD's program as well. So, but Alyssa first.
It was actually 2 years ago now that I started working with the county.
Oh my gosh.
Look at, none of us got any older.
You're so.
And we learned quickly that there was a DLCD grant opportunity. Garrett and I talked with this group about putting together this grant that we basically spent the last year working on with 3J, which now is wrapping up. Warrenton is our last presentation in a couple of weeks, and then the project is officially over. I will send you all the finalized reports. And the question has been raised in various settings, whether we want to pursue another regional grant. That's separate from if City of Astoria wants to get their own grant because they have to do their housing production strategy, which I think we would all want to support you in because we know you need all the capacity you can get. And frankly, it's an interesting project in itself. We've talked here about what next now that we know we have no buildable land and no infrastructure, like what would be the next?
Job's done.
Let's drop the mic. But you know, one of the things that's come up is each jurisdiction basically said, like, you basically further put a point on the things we already knew. And that we have certain key areas in our city that we think are the right places to do housing development, whether they're an opportunity site or whether there's redevelopment or whether it's, like a Fort Point, which is a long-term greenfield that you're working on. And so the question I think I have is it worth having a conversation about looking at a grant, focusing on pre-development of opportunity sites, diving deep into financial, regulatory, design, sort of pre-development analysis. So you take like an RV park example. Just I could point at any city and we could pick any one of them, right? Each one of you guys kind of has, right? We could do the Dairy Gold site in Astoria, right? We could do whatever. But again, probably using the services of 3J or another DLCD sponsored consultant to do some of the legwork around getting opportunity sites ready. So for example, John and I are talking about the Dairy Gold site that the county owns in Astoria, putting out some kind of request for expressions of interest to developers. But what we know is there's some issues that need to be addressed before we even solicit a developer. And so would a pre-development work be helpful to us to get some of that done so that we could then go have a cleaner solicitation for a developer? So that's really the question, right? The county is offering to do the work, to write the grant, to do what we did over the last year. But it's also not required that we continue to use this table to do this. Frankly, I thought it was an effective group of you guys helping steer the project at a regional level. 3J's produced not just jurisdictional summaries, but kind of a regional trends summary, which I think is super helpful. But if you guys want to get on, if you want me to write another grant, let me know.
Yes.
And sort of what we think what's rising to the top around the regional work that we want to do together over the next year, or that would align well with the priorities that DLCD is outlining for housing planning and what they're investing in. We don't have to decide immediately, but I would love your feedback whenever.
We should probably have some discussion between now and June.
Correct, so that we could be ready to move forward.
Yeah. So if you think there is a particular site in your community that could use a deep dive in study in terms of developability, that would be a potential grant application. Again, no guarantee it's getting funded, but it would be something that we could as a group do. Also, as a group, I would encourage us to support the city of Astoria if they choose to go for their own grant as well, because it's a huge lift that they're gonna have to do. Sorry.
And to Jeff's earlier point, like we're all solving the problem together. So Astoria's problem is as much Seaside's problem as much Cannon Beach. Like we're all in this together.
Yeah.
I think we've learned that in so many different ways. And so I think that's the benefit of sort of having a regional project, is sort of the regional problem solving and shared solution set that comes together around that, so that we're moving the needle for each other as well as our own self. And so I think that's the question is, does looking at sites in specific jurisdictions advance a regional conversation in a meaningful way?
Yes.
Thank you for answering and not just leaving it hanging out.
I didn't say yes, but I figured it was a staff.
Yeah. No, I mean, we could probably come up with, I think it's worthwhile.
Yeah, I do.
Just to have some information to see whether some of the ones that people continue to speak of are reasonable. And
maybe they are, maybe they're not.
That's what I'm saying. It's a good answer regardless.
Yeah.
It's again getting to the reality,
Right.
the facts, rather than just the
Right.
chatter. I feel like
I think from our perspective, Mayor, I think we continue to be interested.
I agree with Steve. Doesn't have an option.
every once in a while.
That's good. So in general, Brett, what are your thoughts about the regional approach? Do you believe it was successful here? And do you think it's something DLCD would continue to look at?
Yeah, I see. Well, here's the deal. You were in my area one of 3 regional grants, which we gave this current biennium. So, and so this is not an anomaly for this to happen. We had a regional grant in Columbia County, a regional grant in Clatsop County, a regional grant in Tillamook County. So, I see there being receptiveness for doing that in the future. One thing I will probably say that, for regional grants, looking forward into the future, one thing that we'll want to build in along the way is more kind of milestones for the individual jurisdictions to be able to participate, and to have deadlines kind of built in, so that we can make sure that everyone is kind of going through the process at the same time. And I think that's just one of the inherent challenges of working with a regional project. You have a lot of people at the table. And so it's not something that we're going to be dissuading, but it's something that we want to make sure that's being considered if we're going to be funding a regional grant in the future. I see positives in it. DLCD sees positives in it, especially when there's a shared set of interest from respective jurisdictions, economies of scale, if you want to call it that, and working with the consultant on similar types of projects. So I think if Clatsop County is wanting to do something again, there's definitely receptiveness to it. One thing I'd say is, as Jay had mentioned, the grant process is going to go out in June, early June, with the deadline, it's going to be in August. But as you're putting together projects, reach out to me, and I can be working with the housing division staff to be kind of honing and kind of talking about scopes, to be able to kind of make sure that if there are any questions along the way, that we get those answered up front, and with regards to focus areas. As Jay said, the kind of the priority one, you know grants are going to be going to jurisdictions that have a statutorily mandated requirement to do things like housing capacity analyses or housing production strategies, similar to Astoria. But there is also other focus areas, that we're looking at being able to fund other types of projects as well.
Thank you, Brett. I appreciate that. Anything else to add, Alyssa?
I don't think so.
Okay. Anything for the good of the order? Wow. Is this it for you? No, I'll be here next month. Oh, okay. June 30th. All right.
We're gonna make him write the resolution.
I have bandwidth today.
That little.
Exactly. Yeah. So
Is something happening?
Yeah.
I'm retiring. I know.
Hey, Jay.
Yeah.
What I'll also say is that if there were individuals who were not able to participate in the webinar last week, we recorded it, and we're going to be loading that to the DLCD website as a YouTube video.
It just went up today. I just saw it. So
okay, good.
Yeah.
So just know that it's not too late to be able to review that webinar that happened last week.
Yeah. So I printed the slide deck, and the video was up this morning. So
Okay.
So I'll send it out to the cities just as a link. So John, you had your hand raised as well, so please join in.
Good afternoon, all. I just want to remind the legislature is getting down to the short strokes. They're going to try to shoot for a termination or sine die mid-June. Rep. Javity asked me if I could share with you some of his thoughts about. I sent him your agenda, and so he brought this back. May I take a very few minutes, just to read it to you?
Sure, please do.
We are working to make it easier for cities to expand their urban growth boundaries. This should help because it would allow cities to create smaller lots and to build homes on. We're also working on speeding up the amount of time a city or county planning office has to approve plans and to issue permits. We are working on allocating monies for infrastructure projects like water, sewer systems, water systems, and that cities and counties in order to authorize these new housing projects. And lastly, we're working to reduce the costs associated with affordable housing construction so that developers are incented to invest in rural housing where rents and sales prices might be lower than in the valley. Anyway, please, if you have any issues or you have an organization have asks to the legislature, please get it in as quickly as possible because now it starts the hectic time. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much, John. I appreciate your input.
One last thing I just want to ask you guys is the housing newsletter is coming out in a week or so. If anybody has any news that you want to put in the Clatsop County housing newsletter, send it my way. Otherwise, I'll be bugging you.
All right.
Some of you already know.
All right.
You're not to be about housing?
Yeah.
I mean, if it's about a vacation you took and it has to be pictures.
I stayed in a really nice house.
It'll probably open my click-through rate a little bit. So yeah.
All right. Well, with that, I want to thank everyone from online and here for participating today. We'll see you in a month. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Marcy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Great job, Steve. The technology.
No one
How
got
about
hurt.
that?
No one got hurt.
I think you can do it every month now.
Yeah, all right. Exactly.
Wait till he's.
Yeah, yeah, I've gotta get that all
You gotta
recorded.
hit the
Where is
On the far right, go to the right.
You know, just the end?
Yeah.
The one thing there